Over Form SS8, the determination of worker status for purposes of federal employment taxes and income tax withholding. So this is a 4-page tax form, and either a worker at a company or a firm will use the terms that the IRS chooses to use, which is worker and firm. Either the firm or the worker in question can complete and submit this form to the Internal Revenue Service with the expectation that the IRS will make an independent determination on whether or not this person is to be classified as an employee or as an independent contractor. So we'll go over this form. We're not going to go through every single question to complete this. Rather, we're going to kind of touch on some of the key concepts that are important to understand, simply because there are no formulas, there are no calculations in this form, and the questions that are being asked are really yes, no, truthful type questions about the relationship between the worker and the firm. So let's first start by describing the difference between an independent contractor and an employee. For tax purposes, an employee of a company is not responsible for their own income tax withholding, generally speaking. So while every taxpayer is responsible to pay taxes over the course of a tax year, it is their employer's responsibility to withhold and remit income tax on behalf of that worker throughout the course of the tax year. And they do this when the worker completes a Form W-4, which are tax withholding instructions to their employer. And from that completed W-4, the employer follows very specific IRS guidance that helps them determine exactly how much to take out of a worker's paycheck every pay period. Most of this happens behind the scenes. Usually when you get hired for a job, you'll fill out your Form W-4 along with a bunch of other paperwork. And then in a lot of situations, you'll forget that you ever did this, and then you'll complain every tax year when you either receive an excessively huge refund or you receive an excessively huge tax bill. So that is one specific example of what an employee is not responsible for, their own tax withholding. Conversely, an independent contractor, they've got to do all of this themselves. They get money from this company or this firm that they work for. They've got to sit down. They've got to do their own income tax withholding. They've got to figure out how they're going to get that payment to the IRS throughout the course of the year so that they can avoid underwithholding penalties. Now, the other important aspect really has to do with what's known as the FICA tax. So the Federal Income Contribution Act basically combines the Social Security and the Medicare tax responsibility. As most people know, when it comes to withholding from your own taxes, if you're an employee, you'll see a line item that's marked FICA, usually. Sometimes it might be broken out into Social Security tax and Medicare tax. But you pay 6.2% out of your earned income up to what's known as the Social Security wage base limit, and which changes every year. It's adjusted upward for inflation, but that is your buy-in into the Social Security system. And when you apply for Social Security benefits, the Social Security Administration uses this information, this part of your earnings history, to determine how much you'll be paid when you eventually file for either retirement benefits, disability benefits, or if you're married, your spouse applying for benefits based on your earnings record. And then also you pay 1.45% of your earned income with no wage limit for Medicare. So the what most people don't recognize is that the employer has to pay exactly the same amount on the other side. Employees don't see this because that comes out of the employer's payroll. It's the employer's problem. So taxpayers don't have to worry about the employer side of this. However, self-employed individuals do because they are their own employer. So what happens is instead of paying the combination of 6.2 and 1.45%, which is 7.65% total, a self-employed individual actually pays 15.3% of that FICA tax. They can take a tax deduction on Schedule 1 for 1/2 of that amount because companies are able to deduct their company contribution for FICA purposes. They can deduct that against taxable income. So a self-employed individual can too. However, in today's day and age, there are lots of different jobs or occupations or side hustles that people can participate in, especially with, ride-sharing apps like Uber or Lyft, with food delivery services such as Uber Eats, with different types of, explorations into hiring independent contractors. For example, the financial services industry is rife with a lot of firms that simply want to use that as a reason to kind of classify someone as an independent contractor, even if they're doing actual employee work alongside other employees. So if the two parties, a worker and a firm, cannot hash out this agreement, whether or not that person is an independent contractor or an employee, then you can complete this Form SS8, and the IRS can determine that based on certain information. So we'll kind of briefly overview the 5 parts. So part 1 is general information. Part 2 down here is behavioral control. So in other words, do you have a supervisor? What's the daily routine like? Does the worker have the ability to decide when they're doing work, what type of work they're doing, who they're interacting with, what their daily routine looks like? In part 3, this is financial control. So this is, how does that person receive compensation? Are they responsible for their own materials, supplies, or equipment? If they work with a third party like a customer, who does the customer pay? Does the customer pay the worker or do they pay the company? How does all of this work? Part 4 contains a little bit more information about the relationship between the firm and the worker. So does the worker receive benefits? Is this a relationship that either side can terminate without a penalty, for example? Are there non-competes in place? Is the worker a member of a union? And then finally, part 5 is only completed if you are in the sales business or if you're a service provider. So if the worker is providing a service directly to customers, if they're a salesperson, then they would complete part 5. So all of these questions are designed to elicit a response from both parties, but at least one side. If the other side, for some reason, does not respond to the IRS, then the IRS makes a determination based on the information that's in front of them. So, the IRS has an entire office a program basically that makes this determination based on previous guidance, previous rulings, legal cases that have gone through the court system. So this isn't simply just arbitrary kind of like an easy to hack type worksheet or anything like that. Like each party should put down truthful answers as comprehensively as possible, and then simply let the IRS make that determination. So I guess what would the distinction between an employee and an independent contractor be? So a good example to visualize would be the difference between if you hired someone to clean your house, say twice a month. So this is a common scenario in which someone might say, hey, this person's an independent contractor. They're able to come and go as they please. We kind of have a schedule, but this person brings their own supplies. They do their own thing. They work for a company versus I'm hiring them. Like, all of these things can help someone create the distinction between whether or not that person is actually a household employee versus whether or not they're an independent contractor. So you could have two scenarios where, let's just say, John Doe and his neighbor John Smith both hire housekeeping personnel to clean their house twice a month. Now, John Doe pretty much lets the person come. They agree to a certain date and time of the week where someone will be home to let that person in the house. But once that person arrives, they bring their own cleaning supplies. They clean the rooms in their order. They have a common agreement on what is to be cleaned and what is to be left alone. But other than that, that person comes, spends a few hours cleaning in their own way, and then they leave when the job is finished. Now, on the other hand, John Smith has a very detailed checklist. His person is supposed to report at 8 o'clock on the spot. They're supposed to wear certain attire that he has had a role in selecting. He provides cleaning supplies because he's very particular about what that person's going to use. He has a very detailed process on how to clean each room, what is to be touched, what is to be cleaned, what is to be left alone. And that person, if they finish before the end of a set period of time, that person may perform additional duties as John Smith decides is appropriate. So in that situation, you can't make a legal determination, but you kind of get the feeling that in the first scenario, that person seemed to be more of an independent contractor. That person probably has a little bit more autonomy, a little bit more control over his or her situation. Whereas in the second example, that person almost sounds like an employee. I mean, maybe not a full-time employee, but for that 4 hours or that 6 hours every couple of weeks, that person shows up to John Smith's house and knows that John Smith is in charge of most aspects of what that person is doing day in and day out. So when it comes to evaluating a Form SS8, there are a lot more details, right? So in part 1, we have 11 questions. In part 2, we have 13 questions. Part 3 has 10. There's 10 in part 4, and then there's another 13. So, I mean, that's over 50 questions, all designed to elicit specific pieces of information that the IRS then uses to turn around and help determine, yes, this person is an employee, and the firm is responsible for tax withholding, and the firm is responsible for paying one half of the FICA tax. Whereas, they might take a look at the other situation and say, hey, you know what? This person seems to be doing this for quite a few different companies and kind of provides the same service at the same quality for not only John Doe, but for 5 other households. Not really John Doe's employee, because this person has a little bit more control over their participation in that worker-employer relationship. So that's the reason you would file Form SS8. So we'll go over some kind of highlights here where you want to be specifically detailed. So obviously in the contact information field, you'll want to put as much information as possible. So if you're the firm, you'll probably have an HR department that does this. If you're the worker and you're trying to get classified as an employee, then you should be aware of a couple of things. One, uh, don't expect that your employer won't find out about this. Part of the IRS process actually consists of the Internal Revenue Service getting information as required from both parties so that they can make an independent determination based on that input. So if there's a point that both parties agree upon, great, then the IRS will proceed in that direction. If there's a conflict between what the firm says versus what the worker says, then the IRS may ask for additional detail to just kind of flesh that out. So, and they have the right to do this for all of this information. So, in part one, you're going to complete whether or not you're the firm or the worker. You're going to set forth the beginning and the end date of your employment. And then you're going to enter information for the reason you're completing the form. So we're not going to go into like exact details line by line like we'd normally do, simply because there's really almost no specific line by line guidance in the form instructions themselves. The form instructions exist to kind of tell people why you might file this form, where you can file it, and all of that. And we can get that information from the article itself. There's no additional benefit to watching a video where I just sit here and type in stuff that you would be typing on your own. However, I will highlight areas where the IRS specifically requests supporting documentation because part of submitting this form, obviously, is getting as much supporting documentation that props up your side of the discussion as possible. So in part one, the first thing they ask is, hey, attach copies of supporting documentation about your work relationship. Obviously, for example, if you previously were receiving a Form W-2, but all of a sudden your job got reclassified and they say you're a 1099 employee now, you would want to provide previous versions of your Form W-2 that says, hey, I don't think my job changed that much. The company made a decision because they wanted to save money. Like that would be a perfectly legitimate reason to provide your previous, Form W-2. Conversely, you might be a company that used to issue Form 1099s and now this person wants to be a W-2 employee for some reason, and you have to kind of say, hey, this is what we've done in the past. Any IRS correspondence, rulings, if there's employment contracts or work contracts, invoices, memos, things of that nature. So there's really not a whole lot of additional documentation requested for part one. In part two, we're getting a little bit more maybe specific information about, how a worker receives work assignments, who determines how the assignments are performed, does the firm require reports from the worker? So attach examples of reports. What are you required to submit, or what do you expect the worker to submit as an accountability measure, right? So, if the person requires additional help, how does that additional help come onto the scene to assist? Does that person have to go out of pocket and pay additional help themselves? Do they have to go through the company? Does the company control who can and cannot provide this help? Is there a screening process? Is there company approval required if the worker wants additional people to help him? Part 3 is financial control. So again, if the firm provides equipment materials versus the person showing up with their own stuff, like the housekeepers example, does the person lease equipment, space, or facility? If there is a lease, attach a copy of the lease, right? So, does the firm carry workers' compensation insurance? What would happen if the worker broke something, like if they damaged equipment? Who's responsible for fixing that? Does the worker have control over like how much they get paid, or where and when products get sold, or services that are provided? Part 4, you're going to describe agreements, like if you have a non-compete agreement or a non-solicitation agreement between the firm as a matter of employment, then you would attach documentation. Again, an independent contractor would probably be more free to work. Like, for example, at my financial planning firm a while ago, we had someone that did part-time work for us, and then she did part-time work for 2 or 3 other firms. Obviously, she was an independent contractor. That was a very clearly understood, mutually agreed upon working relationship. But when it came to presenting to other people, our website showed her as part of our team, so you couldn't really apparently tell that she was an independent contractor. But if someone ever asked, the answer was always yes. So, but then that person also represented 2 or 3 other financial planning firms in a very similar manner. So we obviously didn't have a non-compete agreement. Um, you know, she wasn't a part of a union. She may or may not have done her own advertising. I know she had business cards, and she was always open for additional work for for other firms, and we had no problem with it as long as it didn't impact her ability uh, to give us the number of hours per month that we agreed upon. So, what she did with the rest of her hours, it did not matter to us. So, here you'll provide information. If there is advertising like business cards, you'll want to make sure that that's included as well. If there's like a non-compete agreement or a non-solicitation, you'll want to include that. Or if it's part of the employment agreement, you can probably just make a note in line 4 about that. And then we'll go to line 5 for people that are in the sales or service industry. So there are specific questions about things like life insurance, because that's a very common situation in the financial services industry, where independent contractors may work for firms, and then there comes with that a variety of complexity based issues. So if someone solicits orders from outside entities like wholesalers or restaurant operators, like how much time do they spend doing that versus the rest of their job duties? If they have leads, how do they get leads from for new customers? Do they have to go out and get their own leads? Does a manager provide leads to them and they just work strictly with those leads? Do they have to report back on how well they did with those leads? Do they have a sales territory, like a geographic region that they're limited to? Did they have to pay into that? So a lot of that information, and again, I could put in an example and it would be completely different from virtually 100% of the situations facing people that are watching this video. So just understand, at the bottom you'll sign it and date it. Some frequently asked questions include, how long does it take to process Form SS8? As I was going online, I've seen anywhere between 3 and 6 months. So this is not a quick turnaround process. You may be able to appeal to the IRS for an upfront determination, but the first step in this is completing the Form SS8. So either party can complete this form if you are the worker. Just understand that your firm or employer may be notified. So if that's a touch point for you, then you should seriously consider your options. Unfortunately, there aren't a whole lot of options that involve keeping yourself anonymous while getting a determination that plays out in your favor. I don't think that's an option that's on the table. So, and of course, there are warnings from the IRS. I'll point a couple of them out. First, if you don't provide complete information, the IRS might not be able to process your request. In bold ink, if you do not want this information disclosed to other parties, wink wink, including your employer, don't file this form. If you can't answer a specific question, you can always enter unknown or does not apply or not applicable. Again, Part 5 does not need to be completed unless you are a service provider directly to customers or if you're a salesperson. If you need additional space, you can always attach another sheet. You can always over-document. You can always over-provide detail. But just if you're going to err in a direction, err on the side of abundance. You don't want to leave anything blank if you think that you have information somewhere that could actually be helpful. And at the same time, you have to be truthful. You can't just hide information that you think might not support your case because you honestly don't know what the IRS determination criteria is. So every piece of information can be important, and if you omit too much information, you might not get your form processed. So, and then also finally, expect that the IRS might contact you for additional information. So you need to be prepared for that, and just be forewarned that once you send this form off, you might get a little bit, you might get additional questions coming back to you. So that's all we have for this video. Again, this is kind of like an overview of what you can expect if you're looking for a determination of worker status. So if you want step-by-step guidance, we do cover that in our article, which you can find on our website. Simply go to teachmepersonalfinance.com, type in IRS Form SS-8, and you should see this article. If you like our articles, please subscribe to our newsletter. And if you like our YouTube videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, please post them in the comments section. Thank you very much and have a great day.